Carrot. Wild carrots came from Central Asia, with the earliest ancestors likely appearing in Greater Persia. Original wild carrots were thin, pale, and slightly bitter, with a tough woody center and a purple or light yellow color. Early cultivation around 3,000 years ago was actually for the leaves and seeds, not the carrot root itself. The modern orange carrot was developed much later in the Netherlands in the 17th century. Dutch growers selectively bred yellow and other colored carrots to produce a stable orange variety, possibly in honor of William of Orange, the Dutch prince behind the country's independence. That story might be partially mythologized, but Dutch cultivation in the 1600s is certainly when orange carrots became dominant in Europe and eventually the world. The carrot's flavor comes from sugars, along with a compound called terpenoids, to give it a slightly earthy, slightly bitter background note. When you cook a carrot, the heat breaks down the cell walls, releasing more of those sugars and softening the terpenoids, which is why cooked carrots taste sweeter than raw ones. Raw carrots have a satisfying snap and a clean sweetness with a mild bitterness at the end. There are hundreds of carrot varieties, grouped by shape and color. Nantes carrots are smooth, cylindrical, and sweet. Chantenay carrots are shorter, wider, and have a stronger flavor. Imperator carrots are the long, tapered ones common in stores, bred more for shelf life and appearance than taste. Danvers carrots are an older American type, thick and sturdy, developed in Massachusetts in the 1800s for heavy soils. Purple carrots are often described as more intense than traditional orange carrots. Black carrots, common in Turkey and Central Asia, are very dark and have a rich, almost wine-like taste, and are used to make a traditional fermented drink called shalgam. Potato. The potato is arguably the most important food plant ever cultivated, and it originally comes from the high Andes of South America. Spanish conquistadors encountered the potato in the 1530s during their conquest of Peru and brought it back to Europe. But the introduction was slow and many Europeans didn't like them at first. In France, people thought potatoes were strange, sometimes called them pig food, and even claimed they caused disease. A pharmacist named Antoine Augustin Parmentier changed that after noticing their value while a prisoner in Prussia. He hosted fancy potato dinners for French elites and planted a large potato field near Paris, with guards during the day. At night, people took the potatoes and planted them themselves. Frederick the Great of Prussia also recognized their caloric density and forced farmers to grow them in the 18th century. Potatoes helped Europeans grow bigger populations, which fueled the Industrial Revolution and the rise of Western empires between 1750 and 1950. By the early 19th century, rural Ireland relied almost entirely on potatoes. When a potato blight struck, it caused the Great Famine, killing or forcing a quarter of the population to emigrate, permanently changing Ireland's demographics. The potato itself is a stem tuber, meaning it's a swollen underground stem used by the plant to store starch and energy. Each potato has eyes that are actually dormant buds, capable of sprouting new plants. There are thousands of potato varieties worldwide. Starchy ones like russets are dry and fluffy, great for baking or frying. Waxy types like fingerlings and red potatoes hold their shape when boiled and are better for salads and roasting. All-purpose potatoes like Yukon Gold fall in between and are versatile. Purple Majesty and Adirondack Blue potatoes have vivid purple flesh and a slightly earthy taste. Peruvian papas nativas come in many colors and flavors. Lorette is a French fingerling with a buttery chestnut-like taste, while Russian banana fingerlings are waxy and nutty. Artichoke. Unlike most vegetables, what you're eating when you eat an artichoke is actually the flower bud of a large thistle before it blooms. The plant can grow up to 2 meters tall and has silvery green leaves that stand out in a garden. The artichoke is native to the Mediterranean, likely originating in North Africa or Sicily. It's a cultivated descendant of the cardoon, a wild flowering plant native to the Mediterranean basin that was eaten by ancient Greeks and Romans. Artichokes have a bitter, earthy flavor with a touch of sweetness and a faint metallic note. This comes from cynarin, which can temporarily make water and other drinks taste unusually sweet. The heart is the meatiest and most prized part, with a tender, dense texture and a concentrated flavor. Globe artichokes are the main commercial variety, large and round with tightly packed bracts. Baby artichokes are just smaller, immature versions of the same plant. And Violetto artichokes from Italy are a slender, purple-tinted variety with a slightly less bitter flavor and a softer texture. In Roman cuisine, Jewish-style artichokes are deep-fried until the outer leaves are crisp, like chips, while the heart remains creamy. Stuffed artichokes are a traditional Mediterranean dish, popular in Italy, Greece, and the Middle East, where they are filled with herbs, breadcrumbs, or rice and cooked until tender. Broccoli. Broccoli comes from wild Brassica oleracea. It was developed in southern Italy about 2,000 years ago and valued by ancient Romans, but was largely unknown in northern Europe and the Americas until relatively recently. Italian immigrants brought it to the United States in the early 20th century, and it was only widely commercialized in America in the 1920s. One of the major early producers was the Dorigo Brothers Company in California, founded by Sicilian immigrants who branded their broccoli with the name Andy Boy and marketed it to Italian-American communities. Raw broccoli tastes sharp, bitter, and slightly sulfurous. Light steaming softens the bitterness, roasting brings out sweet, nutty flavors, and overcooking makes it green, smelly, and bitter. Standard Calabrese broccoli, the large-headed green type found in most supermarkets, is the most common. Sprouting broccoli produces many smaller florets along multiple stems and is popular in Britain for its rich flavor. Purple sprouting broccoli, a traditional British variety, has deep purple stems and a sweeter, more complex taste. Broccolini, a hybrid of broccoli and Chinese gailan, has thin, long stems, a delicate texture, and a slightly sweeter vegetal flavor. Romanesco broccoli. Romanesco is a type of Brassica oleracea, the same species as broccoli and cauliflower, and tastes like a mix of both. It first appeared in Italy, likely around the 16th century. Every floret of a Romanesco head is a logarithmic spiral. Each floret is made up of smaller florets arranged in the same spiral, which in turn are composed of even smaller spirals. This self-repeating pattern makes Romanesco one of the most striking natural examples of fractal geometry. The number of spirals on a Romanesco head also follows the Fibonacci sequence, a mathematical pattern where each number is the sum of the two before it, resulting from how the plant's growth is regulated at the cellular level. Romanesco has a milder, nuttier flavor than green broccoli, and it's slightly sweeter, closer to cauliflower, with a subtle grassy note. Because of its dense structure, Romanesco takes longer to cook than broccoli and absorbs flavors well, making it great in pasta with olive oil and garlic. Garlic. Garlic is one of the oldest cultivated plants in human history and one of the most universally present flavoring ingredients across essentially every food culture in the world. It originated in Central Asia, most likely in modern Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan, where its wild ancestor, Allium longicuspis, still grows. It was one of the first plants brought into cultivation, with evidence of garlic use in Mesopotamia and Egypt, going back at least 5,000 years. Egyptian workers building the pyramids are recorded as eating garlic regularly, and garlic has been found in ancient Egyptian tombs, including that of King Tut. Ancient Indian texts also describe the plant extensively. Garlic spread globally through trade and conquest, and by the medieval period, it was cultivated across Europe, Asia, and North Africa. Spanish and Portuguese colonizers brought it to the Americas in the 16th century, where it was quickly absorbed into local cuisine. When you cut or crush garlic, you break cell walls and trigger an enzymatic reaction that converts an odorless compound called allicin to allicin. This is why sliced garlic smells different from whole garlic and why crushed garlic is more pungent than sliced. Raw garlic is very sharp and strong, while lightly sautéed cloves become aromatic and floral. Slow-cooked garlic turns sweet and silky, and whole-roasted heads are mild, spreadable, and caramelized, with almost no bite. The rocambole variety is rich and complex, but stores poorly. Purple stripe is bold with good heat. And elephant garlic is huge and mild, more like a leek. Black garlic is aged and fermented, sweet, jammy, and umami-rich. Green is immature, mild, and fresh, similar to a garlicky green onion. Garlic also has a long history of folk medicine, and many of those claims have real basis. Allicin has documented antimicrobial properties, and studies have linked regular garlic consumption to modest reactions in blood pressure and cholesterol, with some evidence supporting its role as an immune modulator. Asparagus. Asparagus is one of the few vegetables that is a perennial, meaning the same plant produces food year after year, for decades if managed well. It's native to coastal areas in the eastern Mediterranean, North Africa, and Western Asia. In ancient Rome, there was apparently a fleet of asparagus, a group of ships dedicated to transporting asparagus quickly across the empire. The flavor of asparagus is grassy, fresh, and slightly bitter. Freshness matters enormously with asparagus, because the natural sugars begin converting to starch immediately after harvest, which is why asparagus bought at a farmer's market the day it's cut is noticeably better than supermarket asparagus that's been shipped and stored. Green asparagus is the most common globally, but there are also white and purple types. Loofah gourd. The loofah gourd comes from Southeast Asia, mainly India and Vietnam, and is part of the cucumber family. When it's young, you can eat it like a vegetable. It tastes mild and a bit sweet, kind of like zucchini or cucumber, and is common in stir-fries and soups. But if you let it grow fully and dry out, the inside turns into a thick network of fibers. These fibers can be cleaned and used as the loofah sponges, often used for baking. During World War II, the dried fibers were used as filters for diesel and steam engines. Before the war, Japan sent most loofahs to the US, but after Pearl Harbor, Americans started growing them at home for industrial use. Loofahs were also used for helmet padding, insulation, and even some medical tools. Young loofah is eaten as a vegetable across Asia, and in Chinese cooking, it's one of the most common summer vegetables in southern China. In India, it often appears in curries and stir-fries. The rigid variety, Loofah acantula, has a slightly firmer texture and holds together a bit better during cooking. The smooth variety is more commonly grown for sponge production because it develops a denser, more uniform fiber network. Sweet corn. Sweet corn is a special type of corn that comes from a natural mutation. This mutation keeps the kernels from turning their sugars into starch while they are still young. Native Americans were some of the first to grow this corn called papoon, and they shared it with European settlers in 1779. The corn kernels burst with sweet, grassy, milky juice when you bite into them, and there's a slightly starchiness underneath the sweetness that gives it substance. Like asparagus, freshness is critical. The sugars in sweet corn begin converting to starch almost immediately after harvest. Modern commercial sweet corn varieties have been bred to slow this process, with sugar-enhanced and super sweet types that hold their sweetness for days after harvest. Super sweet varieties can have 2 to 3 times the sugar content of standard sweet corn, and they maintain this sweetness for a week or more. The trade-off is that super sweet varieties often have slightly thinner, less milky kernels, and a more one-dimensional sweetness compared to the older types. Blue corn, widely grown by Pueblo peoples in the American Southwest and in Mexico, has a nuttier, earthy flavor than yellow corn and a distinctive blue-gray color. It's used to make blue tortillas and blue cornmeal. Corn was the dietary foundation of pre-Columbian civilizations across the Americas and remain, by total weight of production, the most widely grown crop on Earth. Onion. The origin of the onion plant is unknown, but it also originated in Central Asia around modern-day Pakistan. The ancient Egyptians depicted onion in tomb paintings, and paid workers building monuments partly in onions. The spherical layered structure of the onion was seen as a symbol of eternity by some ancient cultures, with its concentric rings suggesting worlds within worlds. Onions contain sulfur compounds like garlic. Cutting them releases compounds which irritate the eyes and cause tearing. Chilling onions or cutting near a flame can help, but the best solution is a sharp knife, which damages fewer cells and releases less of the compound. Raw onions are sharp, pungent, and hot, but heat breaks down the onion's structure and the sugars caramelize. The pungency disappears and a deep, sweet, almost savory richness develops. Properly caramelized onions, cooked low and slow for 45 minutes to an hour, are very sweet with complex umami notes and a jam, almost liquid texture. Onion varieties are grouped mainly by color and flavor. Yellow onions are the most commonly used cooking onion worldwide, with a balanced flavor that becomes sweet and rich when cooked. White onions have a sharper, more sulfurous bite when raw, and are traditionally preferred in Mexican cuisine. Red onions are milder raw than yellow onions, with a slightly sweet peppery edge, and are popular in salads and pickles. Sweet onions like Vidalia from Georgia, Walla Walla from Washington, or Tropea from Calabria, Italy, have high water and sugar content with low sulfur, making them mild enough to eat almost like an apple. Vidalia onions are so tied to that region and their name is legally protected. Only onions grown in a specific part of Georgia can be called Vidalia. Their sweetness is attributed to the area's low sulfur soil. Shallots are a related species that produce small, multi-lob bulbs with a subtler, more complex flavor, combining garlic and onion notes. Pearl onions and cipollini are small varieties typically pickled or braised whole. Cipollini are flat, disc-shaped Italian onions with a high sugar content and sweetness. Crones. Crones, also called Chinese artichoke or knot root, come from China, where it has been cultivated for centuries. It was brought to France in the 1880s, introduced by botanists who grew it in the town of Crones, just south of Paris, which is where the French name comes from. It became common in French grand cuisine in the late 19th century. The flavor is earthy and nutty, a bit like Jerusalem artichokes, but they're crunchier and juicier, more like water chestnuts. Crones are typically sautéed in butter or blanched briefly, and served as a side vegetable. Because of the irregular bumpy surface, they're difficult to peel, and in most preparations, they're simply scrubbed thoroughly and cooked with the skin on. In Japan, the vegetable is traditionally eaten at New Year as part of the oseshi ryori, the elaborate set of New Year dishes. The crones are typically pickled in red plum vinegar, which turns them bright pink, and they're eaten for luck because the shape is thought to resemble the tail of a shrimp, and shrimp symbolize longevity in Japanese culture. One of the reasons crones are largely unknown is that they're difficult to grow commercially at scale. The tubers are small, numerous, and irregular, making machine harvesting unsuitable. Eggplant. The eggplant is often called the king of vegetables because it soaks up flavor and is used in a lot of dishes. In North America, it's called eggplant because early Europeans saw white, egg-shaped types, while aubergine comes from the Arabic word through French. It's native to South Asia and was first cultivated in India and possibly China, with evidence of cultivation going back at least 2,000 years in both regions. Arab traders brought it to Persia and North Africa, and from there, it spread into the Mediterranean through Moorish Iberia and the Arab presence in Sicily. In medieval Europe, the plant was originally accused of causing various illnesses from fevers to insanity. The Italian name melanzana has sometimes been claimed to derive from mela insana, meaning insane apple, though this etymology is disputed. Essentially, all eggplant preparations involve cooking. The flesh is highly porous, filled with air pockets in the cellular structure, and absorbs fat rapidly during cooking. When charred over an open flame or roasted at high heat, eggplant flesh collapses inward and the air expels, and the interior becomes silky, smooth, and creamy, developing a complex savory depth. This collapse is the basis of baba ganoush. The whole eggplant is charred until the skin blackens and the interior steams itself soft. Then the flesh is scooped out and mixed with tahini, lemon, and garlic. Eggplant comes in countless varieties. Standard Italian globe eggplant is large, dark purple, and dense. Japanese and Chinese types are long, thin-skinned, tender, and slightly sweeter. Indian eggplants are small, round, and sometimes green, with a more bitter bite. Thai eggplants are golf-sized balls, firm and bitter, used in curries. White eggplants are mild and creamy, while Graffidio or Sicilian types are streaked with purple and white, sweet and thick-skinned. Rosa Bianca from Sicily is a large, round, rose and white striped variety with an exceptionally creamy, almost buttery flesh, considered one of the finest eating eggplants for its lack of bitterness and silky texture when cooked. Ulluco. Ulluco is a root vegetable almost completely unknown outside of South America. This is partly due to cultivation challenges and partly due to the sheer self-sufficiency of Andean food culture. Ulluco tubers resemble small fingerling potatoes or large jelly beans, with vivid colors, thin smooth skin, and dense waxy flesh. The flavor is mild, slightly earthy and starchy, similar to a waxy potato, but the texture is unusually slippery when cooked. This gooey quality makes ulluco ideal for stews, adding body and silkiness to the broth. Ullucos can also be eaten raw. In Peru, they're sometimes shredded raw into salads, where the texture is crisp and slightly juicy, and the flavor is clean and mild. One big challenge is that they are easily spoiled and don't store as well as potatoes, which has historically limited their spread beyond the regions where they're grown. The leaves of the ulluco plant are also edible, eaten as a green vegetable in the Andes. Bitter melon. This vegetable is intensely sharp and bitter, often compared to raw grapefruit peel or medicinal herbs, but with a crunchy, watery texture similar to a cucumber. Bitter melon is used in small amounts to balance richer, fattier, or sweeter elements in a dish. In Chinese cooking, bitter melon is stir-fried with fermented black beans and beef or pork, where the salt and umami of the fermented beans counterbalance the bitterness. It's also stuffed with pork and steamed. In Japanese cooking, bitter melon called goya is the central cuisine of Okinawa. In Indian culture, bitter melon is stuffed, thinly sliced and fried, or used in chutneys. Frying until crispy reduces bitterness and adds a pleasant edge. It has a long history of traditional medicine across South and Southeast Asia. Charantans and other compounds have been studied for potential blood sugar lowering effects, and some clinical studies have found modest effects in glucose metabolism. Though results are inconsistent and it's not used as a pharmaceutical treatment, the ripe seeds with their sweet red coating are occasionally eaten, and have a mild sweetness that's surprising given the bitterness of everything else. Oca. Oca is another Andean root vegetable with a long South American history. Though it's grown in New Zealand as the New Zealand yam since the 19th century, oca has a distinctly sour, tangy flavor from oxalic acid. The taste has been described as lemony, tart, and clean, unlike anything else in the root vegetable world, which is overwhelmingly starchy and mild. Oca is a starchy vegetable that also tastes like it has a squeeze of lemon in it. The tubers are small, about the size of fingerling potatoes, and range in color from white and yellow to orange, pink, and deep red. Their flesh is waxy and dense, similar to a waxy potato when cooked. Leaving oca in sunlight for a few days reduces oxalic acid and increases sugars, making it sweeter and less sour. The Inca cultivated oca as a secondary staple after potatoes, growing it across different attitudes. Like potatoes, it could be freeze-dried into a preserved product called kaya with a sour, concentrated flavor. In the Andes, oca is boiled, roasted, or added to stews. Its natural sourness works well in savory dishes, or it can be sweetened by sun-curing and eaten as a snack. In New Zealand, it's commonly roasted or used like potatoes. Rhubarb. Rhubarb is a vegetable that is almost exclusively used as a fruit. The tart, celery-like stalks of the rhubarb plant are cooked with sugar in pies, crumbles, jams, compotes, and chutneys, specifically the stalk of a leafy plant. It's native to the cold climates of China, Mongolia, and Siberia, and the rhubarb roots were used in traditional Chinese medicine as a purgative and digestive treatment. The dried root was sold at extraordinarily high prices in medieval European markets, more expensive by weight than other valuable spices because of the difficulty of obtaining it from Central Asia and their perceived medicinal value. The idea of eating the stalk only emerged in England in the 18th century, after forced indoor cultivation was developed. English growers discovered that rhubarb forced in dark, warm sheds during winter produced pale pink, tender stalks that were more mild and delicate than outdoor rhubarb. This method produces a striking pale pink forest rhubarb with a more delicate, sweeter sourness than field-grown rhubarb. Forest rhubarb is harvested by candlelight because light causes the stalks to toughen. Rhubarb stalks are very tart due to malic and oxalic acid, giving them a sharp, clean sourness similar to unripe fruit. Strawberry and rhubarb is a common combination because the sweetness balances the acidity, though flavors like vanilla, orange, ginger, and elderflower work well too. Rhubarb leaves are toxic and should never be eaten due to high levels of oxalic acid. Rhubarb is also used in savory dishes, especially in Persian cooking, where it adds a sour, aromatic element to lamb stews, demonstrating its versatility beyond desserts.